Hello YouTube. So I've just got some new hardware and I thought I'd take the opportunity to use it to clarify, or correct rather, a point I made in a previous video. The video was about Remembrance Sunday, where I elaborated on how it is a celebration of violence that uses superstition, conditioning and social conformity to control your mind into performing violence on the state's behalf, and into thinking that that violence is morally acceptable. In the video, I said that I did not want to make an attack on veterans because they endured terrible things and did not have the gumption to not fight, but did so because of social conformity, ignorance, collectivism, social pressure, propaganda and so-called legal obligation. If you have a mind, you will also constantly reassess your thoughts and words, like I do. Otherwise, there is no point in having a mind. It appears that I was inadvertently conforming and talking shit when I said that. What I really should have said is this. I am making an attack on veterans. Armed forces of the state play just as big a role, if not a bigger role, than the statists in inflicting violence. The doctrine of statism is hierarchical and therefore, by the very definition, starts at the top and requires members of all lower strata to perform their role. This requirement is magnified in the enforcement wing of the state, the armed forces, where you must follow orders. Shit rolls downhill, they say. The statists give the orders, the generals decide how they will be implemented, and it all gets filtered down to the foot soldiers who do the dirty work on the ground. The leader might give an order that results in the deaths and suffering of thousands if not millions. Whilst not wanting to belittle that, it is remote, removed and abstract. The grunts on the ground, however, they perform the violence. They see up close the results of their violence and they keep on doing it. I'd suggest that most people, particularly soft men in suits who have led soft sheltered lives, talk the talk but couldn't walk the walk, and that they would recoil in disgust and abhor the results of the violence they inflicted if they performed it personally and saw it up close. If they saw terrible, vile injuries to people now in abject agony, I'd suggest they'd refrain from performing more violence and call for peace. The grunts, however, they are at the face, beating, bombing, shooting, killing, maiming, stabbing, raping and stealing, again and again and again, day after day. Their very existence is dedicated to it, and all their time and effort goes into it. Compare this to the leader who just says, "Take that town." Laws do exist, however, in an attempt to govern armed conflict, the Geneva Convention perhaps being the most obvious example and the most widely known. This seems contradictory, as what is war if not a total subjugation of your enemy by any means possible, including the most brutal, cruel, unusual, cunning, underhand, painful and disgusting, I could go on, way possible. That's the very reason there are laws, because people are violent animals. The infantry foot soldier is like a wild dog, unless kept under strict control by his immediate superiors through the use of violence, because that is all they understand. They are restricted to only being allowed to use controlled aggression when and where necessary. It's obvious really. The armed forces target young, naive people from the lower socio-economic strata who, without joining a dominance hierarchy like the armed forces, would have limited prospects. They haven't done anything, they don't know anything. They mindlessly conform, and with their training it becomes second nature. You hear people say about recruits, we break them down and then mould them the way we want them. And they say about incidents, the training took over. You see videos on YouTube, mainly American ones, because they seem to lead the narrative on this. These videos are of veterans, usually in uniform, returning from a tour of duty. They're all carefully choreographed. They walk through the door and their pet dog is sat there but doesn't recognise them because they've been away for so long. Then all of a sudden they do and get overexcited. It seems to me that the implicit message is, oh look, there's this great, moral, respectable person who's been far afield protecting us from the baddies. Now they're back, isn't it great? Let's venerate them, you should too. Just think of all the benefits and respect veterans get in America, for example. There's even such a thing as stolen valour. To that I say fuck you. I'll make my own mind up, thanks. It's such a disgusting, self-centred and collectivist attitude. But that attitude is that only our collective matters. If the veteran came back injured, or in a box, or half in a box, that would be fucking terrible. What about the injured and dead on the other side? You will have heard the phrase, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. When British soldiers were coming back from Afghanistan in a box, it's bad for the Brits, but good for the Afghans, or at least some of them. Who gets killed and whether it's good or bad is subjective and depends on which side you're on, at least according to the dominant collectivist way of thinking. I'd suggest it's all objectively bad. You must have heard statist politicians say things like, where diplomacy fails, force takes over. The armed enforcers of statist policies are just violent thugs in the same way an armed robber or burglar is considered to be. They just happen to be in a bigger, more complex system and are socially acceptable. I did once think that they can all get on with it and kill themselves fighting, as long as they don't cause anybody else, any other animal, plant, property, or the environment to suffer. Obviously, that isn't possible. So, fuck the leaders, fuck the generals, fuck the soldiers, and fuck the veterans. And before I sign off, don't think you can shout, defence, defence, to try to justify statism and its armed enforcers. When a state goes to war, it goes to war with another state.